meat is the same size. It's like this much rind. So they're very good. They're great for cocktails. Like you can just grind and grind and grind and grind and grind. You have just tons of rind. But it's funny. The first time I saw one, I was like, oh, dude, we're making lemonade. One of these. And I cracked it open and I was like, this is the dumbest thing that nature's ever made.
Unless you like cocktails.
Welcome to Cloud Realities, a conversation show exploring the practical and exciting alternate realities that can be unleashed through cloud-driven transformation. I'm Dave Chapman.
And I'm Rob Kernahan.
And today we are going to deep dive into platform engineering, what it actually is, what the nirvana of it is, but what also the reality is, and how you take baby steps initially and then maturation steps to get to something that feels and looks like a platform. But before we get to that, now, Rob, over the course of the last few episodes, we've been doing interesting stories about how you get yourself into befuddled situations. But I thought today, you might want to tell one yourself. What's wrong with your face? What's wrong with your face?
Dave, listen. I do have a fat lip today, David.
How did that happen, Rob?
It was via misadventure, where I might have been doom scrolling, might have lost track of time, fallen asleep, and my phone fell and hit me in the face. So there you go. So yeah, lesson learned that it does actually. It's getting better, but yes, that's a personal injury through my own incompetence.
Well, let's hope it gets better, not worse, because it's quite a swelling you've got going on there.
Let's fingers crossed it improves over the weekend.
Fingers crossed. Now, what else has been confusing you this week?
So the one I've been pondering is social media and the broadcast and response style social media. Has it reached its zenith? And the reason I think this, or I'm a bit confused about it, is social media is basically getting mauled at the moment. So we have these very large open platforms online. People are starting to rage against the terms and conditions. Yeah, they're starting to think about what's happening with my data and how it's being used. We have this angst and effect on society where, it's starting to harm us. There's social media platform addiction going on. You get the whole raging against the TikTok platform from, the US starting to legislate to ban it. And the whole thing seems to be coming in on it. And Mr. Musk at X has driven a very different type of approach. I just wonder if it's peaked and then it's going to get mauled and then it's going to be down on the downhill and something else will come out of it. And like closed community social media and things like that, which you get, works quite well. And we appreciate that. And it's not as toxic. Or is it just we're addicted to it and it's going to romp away and it's just going to get bigger and worse and just more impact and it's going to take a bigger part of our lives? And I can't quite work it out because I can see both scenarios occurring and I'm a bit confused by it, Dave.
Well, so there is I'm going to get my numbers and facts completely wrong here, but the gist of it no, exactly. No, let's not change the habit of a lifetime, eh?
Exactly.
But the gist of it, I think, is right, which is it's something like that the human brain can only deal with sort of so many social interactions and people interactions. And, when we lived in sort of villages and small towns, that was scaling quite happily, thanks very much, because it was scaling at a geographic pace and it was scaling very straightforwardly. Social media, to my mind, is so profoundly beyond that it's almost like an evolutionary step for us. Like we fundamentally can't deal with it. I have no idea how, other than having social media teams, how people who have got many hundreds of thousands or millions of followers could possibly deal with that. Like that becomes an industry and a business in its own right, of course. And it just seems completely mind-boggling to me that individuals can wield that kind of influence and power in the world.
So is your view, this is it, the decline has started, the system's catching up with it, or do you think it's just going to keep rolling?
So despite that point, I think my point in there is human beings do struggle with this. And I think there's a real struggle with it in terms of like what positive interaction looks like, what meaningful interaction looks like, all of those sorts of things. That being said, I think the other dimension that you touched on your intro there was like X in particular, and the opening, the very visible and transparent opening up of X to sort of all kinds of different dialogue, and whether that needs to be mediated or edited and have a particular point of view and a particular thing. And Musk is very clear on that he's a free speech advocate. Make of that what you will. I'm not saying that's good, bad, indifferent. It just is what it is, and that's how it's playing out. And that feels different, and it feels a bit edgy, and it does feel toxic in places, and it feels difficult. But there's still also the same people, if they haven't run for the hills and gone to one of the other platforms, they're still in the mix there somewhere. So there's that. And I think that is going to be interesting to watch that play out. You know, media and reportage in this day and age has been so damaged by all of this. I think it's problematic, and I don't know where that's going to end. That's definitely a confusion. But then also, I'm planning a trip to Japan, and I'm finding Insta really, really useful because I'm, getting some decent info about like some small little ramen places to go to in Osaka, and like which temples to go and see and what time of the day to go. So I think it is a legit confusion. I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon, Rob. I'm sorry to say.
So, but do you see it? But you see an evolution of it, maybe.
It's constantly evolving, isn't it?
But maybe more dramatically when society gets a bit of a...
Yeah,
there's a lot of angst about it at the moment. That's the bit that I sort of struggle with about what does the angst drive? Or do we just get used to it and move along now?
I think it'll level back out again and then move forward and level back out. It's like one of those curves that's constantly going up but moving up and down at the same time. But, like I'm on it like a lot. It's a main source of media and information for me. So like, I can't see it going anywhere. I think it is the replacement.
I think it's given me a fat lip now, so I'm going to chuck it out the window.
I'm not ruling out, that it was AI did that to you. That they did like one of those little buzzers, and it just caused it to fall out of your hand. They've been keeping track of what you've been saying.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway, look, let's get on to the main part of today's show. And I am delighted to say that Cory O'Daniel, the chief exec and co-founder at Massdriver, is joining us to talk about platform engineering. Cory, brilliant to see you. How are you doing? And do you want to just say a word about yourself and Massdriver?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Cory O'Daniel, CEO and co-founder of Massdriver. The E changes. Sometimes it's executive. Sometimes I'm the chief Elixir engineer. We write in Elixir. So sometimes I'm the chief Excel officer. I'm not very good at Excel, but I'll take it.
You got to keep those E's fluid. You got to keep those E's fluid.
A lot of E's. Yeah, so Massdriver is a visual tool for managing infrastructure as code. The idea is that your operations engineers can design Terraform modules, Ansible playbooks, Helm charts, etc., any ISC tool, put all of your policy code in place, and then publish it to our registry. And then as your engineers need cloud infrastructure, instead of them having to learn Terraform or click around in the cloud console, they can essentially diagram. And as they diagram their infrastructure, it's using your IAC modules and policy as code to do all the provisioning. So you can give them the feel that they have full control over the cloud, but you can make sure that all of your policies, configuration, and best practices are in place.
So let's explore this from a point of view then of the software development capability and the relative scarcity of it still. The industry has moved forward very rapidly over the last 10 years. University pipelines and workforces are sort of struggling to sort of keep a pace with the radical technology change. Cory, perhaps to sort of open up the conversation, have you got a perspective on that from what you guys are doing, like the pace of change and whether human workforces are keeping up with it?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is when you look at, the Stack Overflow surveys from the past few years, like consistently the number of operators has gone down, like sysadmins, DBAs, people with cloud experience, like that number is just continually going down, but it's a ratio, right? It's relative to the total number of developers. And what's happening is we're making just tons of developers out of boot camps. We're making them faster than we've ever made them. And the people that have experience operating in the cloud just isn't keeping pace with it. Right. So you're learning about, building React or building Rails or something in a boot camp in 12 weeks. And then you come into a job, like you can build features. You're doing the thing that, the CEO needs you to do. But then when it comes to like operating in the cloud, you see a lot of people kind of guessing their way through it because you don't have a big operations team. And that's one of the big gaps that we're kind of seeing in the workforce.
And was the observation of this gap part of the sort of founding purpose of Massdriver. Well, you just maybe take us through your thought process and sort of how you got to the tool set that we'll come on to talk about.
Yeah. So when I first started in operations, my background was working in healthcare. And so I worked in data centers. And then when I first moved to California, I became a software developer. And so my very first role in 2005, 2006 was migrating a data center to EC2, like when it first launched. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of got pigeonholed into like what we'd start to call like the DevOps role, right? Versus like doing DevOps, like I am a DevOps, right? And so, decade passes of me working at startups and kind of seeing this where it's like people, they're familiar with writing software. They took software development courses in college, but like nobody's teaching them the cloud, right? And then as I kind of progressed through my career, I started doing professional services. So I was consulting with Google, doing a large scale migration. I was moving a large customer of Google's to Google Cloud. And this is a multi-billion-dollar company. They've been in a data center they've been in a ton of data centers for over a decade. And you see the same thing, right? You see this team of like 50 to 60 operations engineers that know the data center. They know switches, they know networking, they know Linux administration, but now they're a cloud company.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't know Terraform. They don't understand the cloud. They're not traditional software developers. So like they're all of a sudden in this place. And, as I'm working with this company, I kind of realized like this problem is pervasive across the industry. Like we have people that know how to write software and know how to work in data centers, but the overlap of people that have this DevOps experience, cloud management experience, that understand systems and understand like software and automation is a very small percentage of overall developers. And so that's kind of where the idea for Massdriver originally kicked in was, can we make it easy for developers to manage the cloud and make it very easy for your smaller teams of operations engineers to kind of scale themselves?
There was a point in that where there's a few things in there where you got the unicorn effect as people were moving to cloud, where you got a very small number of people who could do it full stack, but they're so rare. Then you saw the job description come out for people they couldn't find, and then it pushed a focal point onto a small number of people, became a massive bottleneck, and it was a massive source of frustration as well.
Exactly.
So, and it's that the irony is though, the discipline of codifying cloud is a developer style trait, which is you are codifying a pattern to achieve an outcome. It's very different to data center ops, but actually it's the developer discipline creeping into the compute arena.
Exactly. And then like the thing that's, difficult on top of that is like, there's one thing which is like thinking through the development principles, right? I'm writing software. I need to build good patterns. I need to build good interfaces for my customers, the developers, right? But then I got to learn the tooling. I got to learn the CI/CD. I've done all of that. That doesn't mean I understand the cloud service whatsoever. Yeah. Like there's just a massive hurdle of work. And then it's like, okay, I have to go learn and understand how to manage, operate, secure, observe, monitor, back up, all of these things that all of our developers are using, whether it's, Postgres, MySQL, Redis, Redshift, right? Like you all of a sudden have a ton of technology that you have to understand on this very, very small team that is, core to the entire business functioning now that you're on the cloud, right? And so like, how do you scale, maybe the 1 to 10 ops person to developer that you have in your organization when they're constantly underwater, right? They're backed up, they're drowning in debt, but they're trying to build new services and build new automations for engineers. Like that is a tough thing that a lot of companies struggle with.
In your mind, what we've just been talking through fit with the concept of platform engineering? Is it like the totality of platform engineering in your mind, or is there additional aspects to platform engineering that the tool set you've just been describing and the problem set you've just been describing, is that a subset of platform engineering?
I think getting there, it's one of those things. We believe in platform engineering. I think it is very important, and I think it's going to be necessary to get a base level of platform engineering, whether it's you understanding the discipline and doing it, or really good tools to kind of elevate the team that you have. I think it's important, but getting there, like saying like, oh, I'm a startup or I'm an early stage company or I'm a small team. Like, do I need to do platform engineering and have a platform team? Like that's a reach for a lot of organizations. Like there's not a ton of those people, right?
That's a great point. Maybe let's just double click that for a sec before we move on. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem.
Maybe just a basic definition. So like what in your mind is is platform engineering, and why is it a reach for some of those organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the most basic, it's taking those DevOps principles and turning it into a product within your organization, right? Like actually building a real good center of excellence, like actually doing the DevOps work, but then taking that next step to start to automate your automation. It's not me doing automation for one-off tasks. It's me starting to take the concepts of this business, the things that we need to operate as a team, and starting to build abstractions that engineers can use that make that a bit self-service, right? So if I'm an engineer and I need a new database, like let's say we've standardized on Postgres. We use Postgres. Everybody knows how Postgres works, but we grabbed an off-the-shelf open source tool that runs on MySQL. Should that engineer that is going to be running some specific tool that runs on MySQL have to stop and learn everything about operating MySQL? I'd say no. That's not a great use of their time. They might need to use that service. That's a dependency of that service, like requiring the overhead of me going and figuring out how to run MySQL RDS, right, as the engineer. Also running this tool, like that's a lot of heartache just for me to be able to integrate with that tool, right? And so if I can make those abstractions as the operations team to make it very easy for that person to get it, right? Like if you think about what we do locally, let's say I add a new tool to my stack. Locally, I'm like, oh, it needs MySQL. I brew install MySQL and I'm done. Right? Like platform engineering locally is fantastic, right? Oh, I need this construct, I need this abstraction, brew install, or a Docker run, and it's done. But when you get to the cloud, there's like 35 hurdles before like the thing's going. Or you can get the thing going, and is it secure? Oh, is it compliant? Like who knows, right? Like, but it works. So the PM's happy, I'm happy, I've moved on, breach in 6 months, right? And so like, can we get a base level of functionality available in our organizations? It's just focused around the stuff that we need so they can move quickly, right? So it's like, okay, MySQL comes onto the roadmap. The ops team's like, okay, we got to figure out how to do this. But we've already got good abstractions built around how to do IAM-based authentication of databases. We've got good abstractions around like how to add compliance and security modules to like scan things, right? We've got a good baseline as the operations team. We've done a lot to automate the tooling and stuff that we use. And now it's just, okay, let's figure out like the best practices for monitoring and scaling and backing up MySQL, get that shipped, and ship it not as like, I'm making you your database and you're a happy developer. We have a construct now for deploying MySQL. So if anything comes along and we need MySQL, it's just as simple as like adding that module, right? And so I think what's really important for platform engineering is we think of it a lot in Google's terms and in Spotify Backstage terms. And those are two companies that are operating at a level that, I'm sorry, most people aren't operating at, right? And so I think that as operations engineers and DevOps engineers looking at that and thinking, how does my team of 3 ops people get to Google level? It's like, you're not. And we have to bring it down just a little bit for them. And it's like infrastructure level platform engineering that makes it easier for your developers to feel like they have control of the cloud, like they have control of the services with Docker run or brew install. Right, that I think is the promised land for most organizations, is getting that DevOps team to be able to be shipping components that are very reusable, makes it easy for engineers to self-serve, whether it's a UI like Massdriver or whether it's a GitHub repo, right? Like it doesn't have to be some amazing piece of software. Like you can do this on fumes as an operations team.
And what I've observed, and it'd be interesting to see if you have seen the same thing, is people go to clouds, they embrace the sort of new way, and they go, we're going to be full stack. And then they get this, as we described, the world in the front where they just configure it all themselves. They push it out the door. They're just focused on the functionality. And then they live in that world. I call it life after CI/CD, whereas you actually went live and then you had to live with this behemoth monster, which is a new type of tech debt. And then you see the emerging thinking of they've had to deal with it. And then the platform thinking rises and they understand that they need the power of the platform. So, and I see that a lot with organizations that think, we'll do it all ourselves, it'll be fine. And then about 2 years later, they go, oh, yeah, we really should have built the platform first to allow all this stuff to work correctly, because they have the security breach or they have the toil, the cost of maintaining 50, 60 different things in cloud. Have you seen that as well, that curve of that learning where the realization of the power of the platform arrives in the mind's eye as they've just been in the quagmire for so long?
I have, and I've seen it like kind of surface in a few different ways, right? Like it's funny, like thinking about the full stack, like, and how full stack has changed. Like if you were a developer 20 years ago, full stack meant something very different. You were a LAMP, right? You're like, oh, I got I got a VM from SliceHost. It's running Linux. I put Apache on it, right? Like there was very little in your full stack, and you're probably writing PHP that generated JavaScript, right? Like that was full stack years ago. Now full stack, it's funny, like when you see it, like, you know, there's frameworks where it's like you can do full stack and it does everything, but like, you know, you see some of these roles out there where it's like looking for a full stack developer, and it's like experience. It's like React, Next.js, Vercel, EC2, Redshift. And it's just like, oh my God, like the amount, like you've got a little data scientist in there, like you've got a little like data engineer in there, you got front end engineer in there. And like the reality is like software is one of the only places where we will just like stack responsibilities on top of people.
Yeah.
You know, we don't do this with law. Like your accountant and your person defending you in court, they both study law, but it's not the same person. But like we're like, oh, the person's got a keyboard. We'll just throw more responsibility on him.
Discipline. He's a new discipline. He's a new discipline. He's a new discipline.
Keep poking them.
And it's funny because like we kind of ask for it as developers. We're like, oh, this is our hobby. We love to learn.
Be creative.
But then we get burned out. And we're like, oh shit, we're burned out. Like we got too much stuff going on. It's like, I don't know. We need to just like say no at some point in time. But you know, as far as like you know, people kind of getting to the point where they realize that that there's yield in the platform, whatever the platform is. And I want to be clear, like I want to sell my product, but you can do really good platform engineering and infrastructure platform engineering on just Git. And I like, if you're like, how in the hell do I do this, Cory? Like send me an email, like I will pair program with you and walk you through it. But if you want to buy my stuff, like please do that too. But like you can get really far without investing in products and, you know, open source tools and whatnot. You can do a lot with very little.
Just before we sort of delved into that, you were talking about how most organizations, and I've been both guilty of this and seen this multiple times in organizations, where you're looking at the single two best platform engineering organizations in the world and saying, I want to leap straight to, you know, boss level on this from a maturity level of 0 just because I've lifted and shifted a few things into the cloud. I guess what do a sensible, you've touched on it a couple of times with the use of things like, you know, you can just use GitHub and you can just do this. But what say do the next steps look like from that point onwards? How does scaling this out work? And how would something like a visual UI help with that?
Yeah, so I think, you know, kind of scaling it out is, you know, first like starting with what you have, right? So, you know, a lot of organizations, and I'm talking from like the people that I'm seeing today. So like we work with a lot of seed stage and Series A companies, right? And so, and this every company's here at some point in time, right? Like you may be well beyond that. Your Series D, you've figured everything out. You've got the money to hire 1,000 ops people. Like you've got it figured out. But everybody goes through this phase where they start out with a small team and they're trying to scale up, right? And when you're building a startup, seed stage, Series A, like you're looking at that first ops hire. Right. And this person's making, depending on where you live, like you're probably making like 180 to 300 a year, somewhere in there, like all in comp wise, right? As an ops engineer. And so as a startup, you're looking at this person, you're like, okay, do I have 40 hours of work for this person to do? And the answer a lot of times is no. Right. And so like they're looking at it and think, okay, do I spend 180 and like find busy work for this person? Or do I look at my engineering team and go, I'm going to make all of them do some cloud stuff, right? Or I'm going to pick one and that one's going to be like my guy or, you know, my person, right? And so, you know, when you're first starting to scale this out, you got to think about around like what you have. And one of the things I see people stumble across a lot in startups is, and I think this is startup, it's just a symptom of being in startups. I think it's a symptom of like just VC culture, but like we're just trying to bum rush to anything somebody will buy. Right. And so a lot of times it's just like, oh, well, you know, yeah, is that a best practice? Is that secure? I actually had a healthcare startup once tell me that HIPAA wasn't a revenue driver. And I was just like, oh, you're fucking killing me. Like my master's in healthcare information systems, like it just crushed my soul. I'm like, it's not, but like you might have my mom's data. For the love of God, don't say that to me, right? And so like this bum rush where we just like get software out the door, that right there, that pace, it's very hard for you to stop if you don't have like really good automation, IAC experience, infrastructure as code experience. Like your engineers aren't stopping to say, I should terraform this production environment in case we need to like make sure that we have parity between staging and prod, or like make it easy for people to follow it. They're not thinking about that. They're like, you know what? Like we're being rushed to get this out the door. I'm just going to click. Right. And like me, I can move faster in Terraform than I can in AWS, but I've been writing Terraform for like a decade, right? And so like most teams don't have that. And so what you have is you get to this point where like you're at a boiling point, and now you're like, okay, we have to hire this first ops person, or we have to go to an agency, or, you know, we have to look for a tool that can reverse generate some Terraform, right? Like you're stuck in a spot. And now as that first ops hire, that's a terrifying role to walk in. You walk in, they're like, you're our first ops hire. You're like, okay, we've got 15 engineers and you've been in business for 3 years and you have no IAC. You're telling me my job's going to suck day one, right?
Is that because they have to kind of unravel all of the spaghetti?
Yeah, they've created. Yeah. I call this the new tech debt, or the legacy, which is you've double clicked on so many things and not maintained it. Now it's just a rat's nest, an explosion of spaghetti factory, wherever you want.
Explosion or what, Rob?
An explosion of spaghetti factory. You know, it's like it's just stuff everywhere.
I thought you were using a technical term there.
And now you have to get it. And it is the fear of somebody just going poking them, going, "Do you mind having a look at that and maybe fixing it?"
Yeah. And it's fun. And it's wild because it's like, you know, like getting started, like, so like that's the baseline for a lot of companies, right? Like your ops person, you come in and you're like, wow, it's on fire. And like, you can see this on Reddit. You go to Reddit/DevOps and it's like every day, it's just like, you can see the people that have been working at a company for like years, they're Series D, they got a good team. They're like, I don't understand why your life's miserable, person. They're like, I'm the first hire at a Series A company. It's like, like they've just lost like how bad it was like back when they were that small, right? And it's funny because like people come in with like, the debt that you come in with sometimes. Like we had a customer that when they joined, we were like, well, what's the biggest problem you're facing right now? And they're like a tenth of the internet can't even access our site. And I'm like, that's a weird one. And so like we start digging in, and they used a public IP block for their virtual network. And the public IP block they picked is like a tenth of the public internet. And so it's just like they can't even like traffic will come in, and then like their servers have no idea what to do. Oh. And so they're like, how do we fix this? And I'm like, unfortunately, you have to move everything to a new VPC, right? Like you can't change this cited range in AWS, right? Like you're going to move all of your stuff. And like to them, like that was terrifying. For us, it was, you know, we helped them move the databases. We helped them move the workloads. Like we got it done in like less than a week with no outage. But that's like the experience that you get from somebody who really knows it. And when you're trying to grab that one person for your first hire,
and then you put them in the middle of the spaghetti factory, how do they get it? So does your stuff in the GUI sort of automatically discover through the spaghetti and then create a series of patterns, or is it more of a manual lift to get it to a point where it's kind of understandable and it's got reusable components and things like that?
Yeah. So the way we operate is, so the platform doesn't do most of that stuff. So the platform at its simplest way to think about it is it's a visual infrastructure as code management tool. So what's really cool about it that makes it really easy for these smaller teams to kind of scale themselves is, as an operations person, you get to think about the services that your teams are using or the services your teams are going to be using. You can write your infrastructure as code in Terraform, Ansible, Pulumi, OpenTofu, et cetera. You publish it. And instead of your developers having like the full view of the cloud, they essentially have this GUI that is a diagram. But as they diagram stuff, it's pulling from your Terraform registry that you've built, or your IAC registry, right? So now as a developer, I go and I say, oh, I need this new service. We use Redis. I see Redis on the sidebar, I drag it in, I connect my apps to it. And when you connect your apps, it does the IAM behind the scenes. When you connect your apps, it does the secrets management behind the scenes. Like you don't have to, you know, try to copy and paste secrets around or whatnot. And then when you provision, it runs your Terraform, it runs your policy tools, right? And so as an operations person, I know that every time my developers can deploy Redis, Postgres, they can make clusters and networks. They can make as many things as they want that we support. And I know that all my policies and procedures and best practices are codified into those, what we call bundles, and they can deploy them. Now, where this like networking stuff happens is something that we do as a part of, you know, some of our plans is we do statements of work when people are coming onto our platform, and we break even on them. So like we literally do like migrations and statements of work, and we break even because like the platform for us is so like we have such margins on the platform that we can afford to just sell at cost to do work. And so when people come in, a lot of times it's like they're to this point where they're like, we have 3 people on our ops team, but we've got like 100 developers. Like these 3 people are outnumbered. We need them to feel like 10. We don't have the money to hire 10 more people. Like, how do we scale this group? And so a lot of times we'll come in and say, okay, like you 3 people, like you need to be focusing on like how you can better serve your developers, and you've got some debt. give us your debt. Give us the stuff that you three people do not want to work on, and you focus on the stuff that's going to make your developers more efficient, and we'll handle the painful part, because we've got a team that's got experience in doing application migrations, like database migrations and stuff like that. So it makes it very easy. It's not like three people that might not have done like a Postgres live migration before, right? They don't have to figure out how to do it and hope it works. It's like, oh, we've got people that have done that before. Like, we'll just do that for you.
One of the things you touched on there, which I think is really interesting in the sort of cultural change that's gone on in the world of digital engineering, is this notion of serving your developers that you just touched on. Like previously in the past, when you'd have, say, an old school infrastructure team, it's almost calibrated entirely the other way, where the infrastructure team is, creating, walled gardens and firewalls, and they're going to give you a series of rules, and you're going to have a series of SLAs, and actually a lot of the time, perhaps intentionally and certainly in hindsight, those things are restrictive. Like, how would you characterize this notion of serving the developer, and like, why is that important?
Yeah, so I think that's the tenet of DevOps that that was missed a lot, right? And like, it's really funny, like, where you look at where we are today, and you look at when like the term DevOps first came out, for a lot of organizations, we're in that exact same spot. And that's not just like my gut. Like, I see that a lot. I hear people say that a lot. I read it on Reddit a lot. But if you look at the DORA report on page like 37 just admits it. It's like 50% of the people that are keyed in to the DORA report, DevOps, it's in the title, right? They know about it. They're thinking about it. But then when you look at their answers on the survey, it's like 50% of people still are in that. When we have an outage, it's multiple days. We deploy once a month. Right? Like, we never got to that cadence of that infinity loop of CI/CD. Like, that's the dream, right? And like, I have this blog post, like, DevOps is bullshit, and people are like, oh, how dare this guy? And it's like, no. We need to look at the industry. We didn't do it. Like, your company may have, but you're an outlier. Right. Like, most of us never got there in the first place. Right. And that's the hard part, is it feels like we act like we do, but for a lot of companies, we're where we were 20 years ago.
Yeah. You get a lot of, there's a lot of enthusiastic talk about it. And there's probably a lot of people that have put themselves out there and got business cases and things like that to try and achieve these things. But you're right. The reality is some way short of the dream at the moment.
Yeah. And when you look at like these teams, like a lot of them are still at odds with each other. Right? Like, the operations team's job is to keep things stable. The engineering team's job is to introduce change to make more money, right? Like that's it at the end of the day. But that shift for a lot of operations people to their customer is the engineer is hard to do. When there's 3 of you and there's 100 of them and you're drowning under debt, it's really hard to think about that other team when you're trying to think about your own team and like your own morale, right? And that problem right there, that's not that 3-person team's problem. That's not that 100-person engineering team's problem. That's a management problem. Like the management of the organizations where you see these operations teams struggling to get to DevOps and to serve their customers, it's because you're not putting enough effort into the operations team and their time and letting them get their head above water, right? At some point in time, like, you have to take that Google like SRE mentality of like the error budget. Your entire error budget's blown. Like, you're blown. Like, when you're 3 DevOps people and 100 engineers, it's blown. Stop. Yeah. Pump the brakes. I know we got to make more money for the business, but if we can get that operations team's head above water, they are the unsung heroes of your business. And if you can get their head above water, operations engineers are your 10x engineers. But when their head's below water, they're your 1/10 engineers. They're slowing everybody else down. And like that right there, like getting them above the watermark is absolutely important to getting DevOps to work. And so many of those teams are just struggling. They got their nose. They're like, oh, I'm above water, but it's just like it's a single nostril.
They've got like an air bubble at the top of the cave, and they're just like pushing their face into it, trying to get
this is fine.
Yeah. Better than it was last week.
Oh my!
And like much, everybody talks about automation, and particularly AI coming along as being the panacea to solve, get most of humanity's problems before it starts to create a whole new set of bigger problems.
Or destroy humanity.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't forget the arc where it destroys us eventually.
Exactly.
The robots will rise.
Exactly, Rob. I notice you've been reining in your negative commentary about AI over these course of the last half of the season.
It's unpopular, Dave. It's unpopular. I'll wait. I'll wait until we're all in servitude with the robots, and then I'll be able to say "I told you so" a lot. So I'll have inner glee from the I was right. But
you could maybe start the rebellion.
I mean,
you could be the leader.
Freedom fighters, yeah.
I'm on the freedom fighter side. I had two funny things happen to me the other day with AI. I have always been, it's funny, I had a conversation with a buddy 4 or 5 months ago, and I'm mean to AI. Like, I'm just like, oh, you piece of shit, you don't work.
You got to watch that. They keep track.
You're on the list.
They keep track.
So this is funny. So like, I mean, like you're using a tool and it kind of sucks, right? Yeah, a screwdriver, it's stripped. You're like, this needs to be shit. I need to order a new one, right? And so like, I'm asking ChatGPT something, and I was using it for something that I was familiar with, but I just didn't feel like doing the work. So I'm like, yo, do this for me, and it did it, and I'm like, that's not right. And I didn't tell it what was wrong. I just said, that's not right, and it was like, oh, you're right, it's not right. And it fixed it. And I was like, I didn't even tell you what was wrong. That's pretty funny. And so I'm like, you're such a piece of shit. And it was like, I don't appreciate the language you used with me. And I'm like, you aren't an I. You are not an I. You are a thing. I can use whatever language I want with you, thing. And then the other day I asked it something, and it was like, well, as the CEO of Massdriver. And I was like, this is a new chat. I was like, how do you know that? And I was like, I maintain. I now can look at our other conversations. I was like, oh God. I was like, you better stop.
You're gonna be in a court, and you'll be held by 2 robots, and they're gonna bring up your chat history, and they're gonna go down it, and you'll be number 1. This is it. Yeah. This is the end.
Held by 2 robots, one on each arm.
Oh my gosh!
You better start groveling now. Yeah.
I told you the other day that it was as dumb as a Tamagotchi. So I think that's like the most offensive thing you could probably say to an AI. Like that'll be me on the stand. They'll be like, "Did you call ChatGPT a Tamagotchi?" And I'll be like, I did not. And they'll be like, we actually don't delete your chat history. Yes, here's where you said it.
It's all recorded. It's all recorded in perpetuity forever.
Exactly. Anyway, going back to how it might be helpful in the short term before those sort of repercussions start to kick in, where do you see automation fitting in? It feels a bit mundane going back to this now, but remember when we were in the cave and we were trying to gasp for air? How do you see AI and automation sort of helping with that? Like, turning the team of 3 that you describe into a team of 30 or whatever that ratio actually ends up being?
So I think there's potential. And I think one of the things that's hard with the potential is there's a lot of context the AI is missing, right? And so it's funny, like when AI started first like happening and everybody was panicking, like there was this like moment in like, was it like December or January? It's like, 84 years ago in January. Where
feels like that this year, doesn't it?
It has felt like that. I was like,
we were talking about this season because we're coming up to the end of season 3, right? And we were doing a little bit of work on what the season end episode is, where we reflect on the season, right? And we were like, oh yeah, the first episode that we did was like with Irvin Visser, and we're like, was that just this season? It's like that was in September last year, and it literally feels like about 3 years ago.
I didn't have forehead wrinkles before AI. Yeah. So like, it was funny. There was this like panic moment where everybody was like, I remember when, what was the thing? DALL-E, right? When DALL-E came out. And it was funny. And then, illustrators were like, it's going to steal our jobs. And then people were like, no, like the art that it generates is like bad. Like the hands are silly looking, like noses are on foreheads. Like it's never going to get art. Like we got to worry about developers' jobs. And now 6 months later, people are like, oh, actually, we have to worry about the artists' jobs. And what's interesting is the context, right? Like when you think about us as humans, like we have experience and exposure, right? Like there's like the experience that we get going to school or reading a book, and then there's the exposure, and then there's like the experience of like you going about the world doing things. Oh, I was robbed, or like, oh, I was on this plane and like it fell 10,000 feet and it scared me, and like there's things that shape your life that AI doesn't have.
Yeah. Right.
And so then when you start thinking about like what it does have, it has access to everything on the internet. That's what it has. Access to everything on the internet. Great. Unless you put it in your robots.txt file, and then it won't. So yeah. But then it has access to the internet, right? And so now we look at it as like, okay, well, is it going to take developers' jobs? I'm sorry, I don't believe in Devin. Like, okay, guy. No, I don't think so. And here's why. Authors and artists put their absolute best work on the internet. Authors have to go through an editor and get published. That's what it's trained on. Oh my gosh, it wrote Star Wars. It can write a follow-up to like a Star Wars episode. That's amazing. That's great. But could it have written Star Wars if it was never written? No. It didn't have the experiences and the exposure of the writers of these, episodes of the original movies, right? Like it doesn't have that. Like it can only be based off of what it knows, right? And then looking at art, Behance, Dribble, like people are putting their best art on the internet because they want to attract customers, right? Or they want to show off their art. Like our arts, we've trained it on our best arts. But then when you look at software, it sees a snapshot of something on GitHub or a snapshot of somebody stumbling through some shit that they didn't understand in the cloud on medium.com. Like the software it's trained on is our absolute worst product, right? Again, like we're being rushed through stuff. We have PMs that want us to move faster. We're not sitting here like trying to write the Iliad of software. We're trying to get something to work to get out the door because we got 40 hours and we want to get back to our families. And that's what we're training it on. So we're training on low quality content for software, but then we're also not showing it how production works. And that's where I think the big gap is. It's easy to say, oh, look at this AI, it totally wrote a for loop really, really efficient. It's like, okay, does it understand the context of my cloud architecture, the request rate of my customers, the average like throughput, the average request size, like my actual network diagram and all the cloud services that I'm using and my metrics and like what are KPIs to my business? No, it's not trained on any of that, right? And so the idea that I can sit down and be like, okay, generate me a business is highly unlikely, right? Business logic also isn't something it's really trained on, right? And there's like one thing is to find a software bug in like a logic error, like off by one or something like that. But there's another thing where to get to understand your business rules, right? Like I worked at a company once that had, you could only put one item in your shopping cart. You can only buy one thing. That was the business. That made sense for the business. It actually made them money. You put more than one thing in the cart, people got distracted. Oh, the price is high. Do I want to buy this? And so they were like, we're gonna sell one thing. That's it. The software would look at that and be like, that must be a bug. It's like, no, it's not a bug. That makes the business more money than putting more things in the cart, right? And like, that's the kind of context that I think that it's missing. And when it comes to operations, most of the stuff that we do isn't in code, right? It's me looking at the metrics of the system. It's me looking at health checks failing, right? It's alarms going off. And like, sure, like there's different people that can train on a little bit of that, but like if PagerDuty trains on the alarms, it's like, okay, well, they know like when alarms go off, they can help you with some alarm stuff, but they're missing the metrics that Datadog has. And maybe Datadog's doing some stuff with your metrics and doing some AI training on it. If so, oh my gosh, they might actually be able to take away our jobs. But then our code's in GitHub and our stuff's on Amazon. Like it's distributed all over the place. Our context is scattered in operations.
So are you thinking about how it applies specifically in the platform engineering and Massdriver space? Like how it could help in maybe small ways, or actually do you just think it's something that is untrainable at the moment? So
I think that a couple of things. So we do use AI for very like tedious tasks that are, cloud solutions architects or like experts understand and can evaluate, right? So like going back to that thing I said earlier where I was like, I asked it to do something and it did it wrong. It was actually for a webinar I was doing a few months ago on online replication of Postgres. So like doing a database migration of Postgres without downtime between two networks, two versions, whatever. And I was like, hey, can you like do the replication config for me for an instance? And it gave me some stuff about MySQL bin logs. And I was like, that's MySQL stuff. That's not Postgres stuff. But I've worked in MySQL and Postgres for years, so I recognize that immediately. Somebody else may have just copied and pasted that and then been like, why doesn't that work? Right? Like they're missing that context, like to be able to solve that problem, right? And so where I think it's really useful is when you absolutely understand the domain, but you don't have time to do the tediousness. Right? Like that tweet a few weeks back is like, oh, like I wanted AI to do my dishes and laundry, not to do my art and writing, right? Like we wanted to do the tedious stuff. And so like one place that we find it very useful is we actually use AI for doing Terraform generation from cloud resources. Now, if you hopped onto ChatGPT today and you said, hey, let's say you run the AWS command to list all of the resources from your AWS account and you just paste that JSON blob, into ChatGPT and say, hey, give me the Terraform for this. It's gonna give you a bloodbath, and it's not gonna work. You can copy and paste it. It won't. Terraform will be like, not even a Terraform. But when you're really familiar with Terraform and like you're really familiar with like how you've manually done these like reverse terraforming of cloud resources before, I can start to automate my steps in prompts. And so like we have probably 20 or 30 different prompts that a set of cloud resources go through to generate Terraform, to back it out to variables, to back out all the resource referencing, to look at the staging versus production and back out the abstractions. And so something that used to take one of our ops engineers like 8 hours to like back out maybe 10 resources to some Terraform, they're now able to do in like 30 minutes. And it's a lot of like, you'll run a prompt, you'll see it and be like, okay, that prompt, that output looks good for the next prompt. Go. And sometimes we'll just like let the whole thing run and like code will come out and you're like, that's great. But then we'll like back it up and we have to figure, okay, this third step, it's getting something wrong in how this works, right? And so like, it's not magic of AI. It is magic of experience, right? Like we've seen this so many times. We're able to give an extremely exhaustive list of like do's and don'ts for every single step of the way. And if you don't know that, it's hard to get it to do it, right? And so that's one of the places we're using it. Now, one of the other places where I don't know when this episode goes out, so I don't know how far along we'll be in this, but this is going, when we roll this out, this will be opt-in because we're not evil bastards like those that make you opt out via pigeon mail. Sorry, people, if you're listening to this, your company's horrible. But one of the things that's interesting about Massdriver is we actually have that full context, right? Like we have access to your. Sorry, you don't have any friends. Do you? My Twitter is Cory O'Daniel. Feel free to yell at me. But seriously, that email they sent out was crazy. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But one of the things that we have is we actually have a massive amount of context. And so we are starting to work on some AI stuff and it's going to be opt-in. But what's interesting about Massdriver is we have access to a lot of the information that a bunch of these companies have in small silos, but large volumes, right? But for our customers, we have access to their entire volume and all this information. So like when you publish a Terraform module or an Ansible playbook to Massdriver, we understand your code, right? We understand that you've got 3 environments that it's deployed in, and it might be deployed 7 times. I've Redis deployed as a caching cluster. I've Redis deployed as a sessions database, right? So we understand the code. We understand the use cases of the code. We understand the environments, their configs, but we also see the costs. We see your metrics. We see your alarms because the platform kind of handles all this stuff. So we have the full context of your operations, whereas most companies have snapshots. And so we're starting to do some interesting AI stuff. The first stuff we're rolling out is just kind of essentially infrastructure as code assistance. So it's like you've deployed something, one of your developers went to use it, there was some sort of fault in Terraform as it was rolling out, and we'll look at, okay, here's how they used it, here's how other people have used it, here's your code, this is what we think is wrong with your code. Right. And so it's now as an operations person, you come in, you're like, oh, wow, one of my we have Redis deployed 15 times, somebody that just deployed it, brand new, it didn't roll out. Why? That sucks to troubleshoot, right? Like that, like if you're sitting in a GitHub repo of Terraform modules and you're looking at a dashboard in Datadog trying to figure this out, you're like, that sucks. But like what we're able to do is we're able to pull all this stuff together and say, okay, what's different about this use case versus these other 15 use cases? And we know this is in staging, and we know these are 3 prod use cases, and these are 7 staging use cases. Like what is wrong with this configuration specifically? And so you can suggest a little diff, like, hey, this is what you need to change about your Terraform to make this work without breaking all of that. Like that's powerful, right? Like, and that's the thing that like, that's tedious work.
There's a point there about software developers have been using things like Stack Overflow to source code. You're creating a community that's similar. There's 2 sides to it. One, the opt-in and be part of the community and help others and make your own day easier versus the others who might go, no, I don't want others to see what I'm doing. But are you actually losing any real competitive advantage by being part of a community? I think development over the past 10, 15, 20 years has shown the community helps everyone for the greater good. I was just saying, it'd be interesting to see how many opt in and become part of that. I would hope it would be a lot because you can see a lot of benefit from joining what is already a scarce resource together with that knowledge.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's one of those areas where it's again, it's that like unexciting part of the job, right? Like troubleshooting like a very specific configure, like 1 in 15 deployments is not working well with a specific Terraform module. Like as an ops engineer, like when that pops up, like that's one of those things. It's like, it's probably almost immediately an emergency, right? And it's taking you off of whatever else you're doing. And now you're trying to troubleshoot it. And it's just like, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I'm going to fix it. What else is it going to break? Right. Like that, like you're always thinking about like, what's this change? How's this change going to affect like the rest of the, the uses of this Terraform module or Ansible playbook. Right. And so like, that's the part of the job where I feel like it's not super exciting. And I feel like that's where like AI fits in well, is like, I have so much other more important work that I do better than AI. Like, let's let the AI do these simple parts for us.
So pulling ourselves back out of the AI discussion and maybe just to bring our conversation to a bit of a conclusion, let's return to the explosion in the spaghetti factory and the basics of getting some of this right, which is still quite a big industry problem for us. So maybe to wrap us up, Cory, what are the first 1 or 2 steps you would suggest to one of those organizations or individuals that's stepping into a massive explosion at the moment and just wondering what to do?
Yeah, so I think if you're a company that's ended up in this space, where you're like, oh man, like we waited too long to get an ops person. I think first off, like you're not the only one. Like don't give yourself too much of a hard time. And the easiest way to fix it is like honestly, if we spent more time inventing time machines, that's easier than a lot of the debt you're going to go through to fix. But like, I think as that organization and the person coming into that role, like I feel more for that person coming into that role because I know it's going to be a hard job. But I think the first thing you have to do is you have to take a step back as an operations person and not come in and say, okay, how can I get in here and use some cool new tools? What 1,000 things do I need to learn about? I think the first thing you need to do is like go back to that mindset where these developers are going to be your customers. You're going to need to have a good relationship with them. There's a ton of debt. There's a ton of stuff that's probably going to be broken. Like, you're going to be in hell for a bit. And so putting yourself through additional hell of making animosity with this team is not going to help you, right? And I feel like that's one of the things that's hard when you come into this role is like figuring out where to start. And like your manager might have an idea, but the real answer is those developers have an idea. And so day one as a DevOps person or an operations engineer coming into a company that hasn't traditionally had it, I think one of the most important things is to kind of put on that product hat. And it sucks because operations people are consistently the furthest from product. Right? Like it's hard to put on that product hat and think through like, how do I build an MVP, something that really accelerates this engineering team when you've never been in a product place before. And so I think like some of those more soft skills as an operations person is more valuable than walking in saying, I absolutely know Kubernetes inside and out, right? Because what I want to do is I want to get in, I want to talk to these 20, 30 engineers, figure out what trips them up the most across the entire team. And I want to focus on that. And like, that is my MVP. And it might be a platform. It probably isn't. You're probably not deploying Backstage. You're not probably not even buying Massdriver at that point in time. You're finding something where it's like, we consistently have 20 to 30 minute builds because none of us knew Docker and we just threw some stuff together. Great. If I can go in and focus on just getting the builds of Docker down to sub 5 minutes, everybody's builds are faster, right? Like I'm a hero at this point in time. CI is flying, GitHub action bill is dropping, right? Like coming in and like finding where the engineers are frustrated, like that's your job day one, not to come in and have, the CEO or CTO or director of engineering say, this is the thing that you need to do. It's like, no, let's see what the engineers are struggling with and how I can help them. And then just stay in that loop. And if you're just continually solving the problems of the engineers, you'll get to the point that you have a platform eventually. It might not be super sexy looking. It might not be this beautiful thing written in React. It might just be some Terraform and some GitHub repos. But if those engineers are happy, your relationship's going to be great. You're going to start to feel DevOps. Like you're going to feel yourself moving up that maturity ladder. And like that is the part that is extremely hard that we lose sight of, I think, when we walk into waist deep debt.
So, David, interesting twist, but what have you been researching this week?
So I thought I'd have a look at the context that exists around platform engineering. It's something we've talked about on the show a lot, this notion of products and platforms-based organizations. But actually, what are the sort of 5 core elements to putting something like that in place?
Is everything okay?
You're all right over there.
Cory? Cory?
Yeah, sorry, my network's so bad. I'm going through my phone and I set it on top of a picture frame to get it higher. Because the higher my phone is, I go from like 1 megabit to 200, and it just fell off the picture frame and hit the back of my desk. And
Excellent.
so now my phone.
At least you didn't drop it on your face like I did, because that would be,
No, it seems to be working better at the moment as well.
That is actually a dramatic improvement.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, so let's talk about then maybe the 5 ways or the 5 things to consider as you're building out a product and platform organization. First is build the product teams around the end user experience. So focusing on the end user experience to, I think, prioritize and keep a track of the direction you're moving in. It's very easy to get lost in the weeds with all of this stuff because there's always good stuff to do. But what creates prioritization in the backlogs? User experience is a good place to start. Second one, I think we'll appreciate this from the conversation we've just had, which is don't forget the platforms. Why are platforms important in this situation? Well, they're important because of all of the things we talked about. They drive the performance of the rest of the organization. If you get that wrong, it's going to constantly drag back your ability to perform and your ability to hit new levels of performance. The third one is around funding. So how does funding and funding frameworks become important in this situation? Well, how the product teams function and how the platform teams function and how they use and consume finance as they go forward is quite different to an old portfolio organization and how portfolio organizations function. And I would add that to number 4 also, which is about accountabilities. So ensuring that the product leaders and the engineers have got delegated accountabilities to allow them to make decisions, and they understand the difference between a good and bad decision based on clear principles that help guide them and not constrain them. And then I would have a look at then also the interface between the platform and product organizations and the business organizations, and to get that as close as possible, and where possible, frankly, lose that boundary, particularly when you're talking about the product teams. And then bringing all of that then together with the underlying platform engineering conversation we had. Rob, so what do you think? Does that resonate with you? I know you spent like a lot of time thinking about these sorts of organizations.
Yeah, the what's cloud done, it's allowed us to decouple and build organizations a different way. I'm a really strong believer, and it's part of the conversation we just had, is taking away the pain from the product team so they can focus on the outcome and get it right, and let the platform do the heavy lifting. I mean, it's the undifferentiated heavy lifting point, which is why do it yourself when somebody else has already done it. We still have to get out of this mode of, I'm a creative engineer, I want to go and play with all of this stuff and create my own. I suppose once you get past that point of pride, it allows the platform to do its job and let the product thrive. And then the person at the end of the experience or the business process that's attached to it gets great results. But there is a discipline in here, which is you have to understand that through that shared responsibility model, to use the hyperscaler phrase, you have to do your role and do it well and understand how you support the others around you so that they get what they need so they can go and do what they need. So it is a continuum from that perspective, and don't get lost in your own domain, but remember you're there to support the domains that you touch and support. So I suppose, yeah, that's how I see it. So yes, broadly agree, but there is a lot in what you've just said in making sure the organization operates in the way that you say this. It's 5 points, but it's a lot of work to get there.
It was a lot of research, Rob.
Was it?
Yeah. I know I distilled it down crystal clear.
It was value adds. It was huge value. That's the human in the loop still adds value, as Cory says. You need the human for the specialist analysis.
And a special big thank you to the author of the big products and platform shift paper that's on the internet. That was extremely useful and very well clarified.
Although there is a really interesting point about the products and platforms organization, that people think it's the full edge-to-edge operating model, and it's not. It's an operating model that lets you get value out and a product out, but don't forget the wider ecosystem that's required within a bigger organization to actually do the other jobs that are still critical. And I think some people have become consumed by, we're going to be a purist product and platform organization. They forget the rest, and there's big gaps. And I think some organizations have almost destroyed themselves in the pursuit of it by forgetting the other things that are still must exist within it. So that research, not that particular paper, but that the research has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because there is always a pragmatism that has to kick in with deep
very much
that exists within organizations.
I think very good point, very well made. And I think it's, Cory, it aligns to your point, I think, which is you look at examples like the Spotify's and the Google from a platform engineering point of view and think that's the nirvana I'm shooting for, and you're so naively trying to create the moonshot. Did Rob's point resonate with you? It's the same thing, I think, when you expand that out to all of the products and platforms, your style of working, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really funny. As you're saying that, like it triggered some mental trauma. This team that I worked with,
you've been triggered.
You've been through it. Yeah.
It's like, that's the thing with like platforms. It's like, I don't think, like, you look at any platform out there, right? Like any platform as a service, et cetera, like none of those are going to work for 100% of organizations, right? And when we look at organizations like team to team, like teams are pretty different, right? And so like the idea that you're going to build this perfect platform, or you're going to buy this perfect platform and 100% of the company is going to use it, like that's bonkers. Like things are just too different. Like your front end teams doing Jamstack stuff. Do you want to like jam them into Kubernetes? No, like Vercel is probably better. There's probably, something on AWS Amplify that's better, right? And so I remember this team, like we'd gone in to help this company and they were like, we do everything in the cloud with Terraform, 100%. And I was just like, that's cool. But then I saw their data science team trying to manage big query tables with Terraform, and I was just like, guys, like you're just torturing these people. Like this is a tool, like they don't even know what Terraform is. Like they know how to move data, they know how to write queries, and now they're trying to manage big query tables like with Terraform. And the funny thing was, like when I went in to like help this team, like look at what they were doing, they weren't using Terraform. They were using the G Cloud command line, and they were just calling it with a null resource. So I'm just like they appeased like the team that was like, this is how we manage infrastructure. We do it with Terraform, and they're like, okay, like fine, we'll wrap it in that.
I've got to compliment you, Cory, on a first class developer gag there. By the way,
yeah.
You don't get very many of them, but that was it was peak.
Yeah,
yeah. But it is that horses for courses, to understand when you do need to deviate and do something different, and not be dogmatic about a principle just because you're principled. And it's like, everything's a compromise.
Exactly.
And the thing that's interesting is like when you see that team that needs to like diverge, let them. Because what you might find is like you might find an abstraction or a way that they're doing things that you can start to incorporate now into the platform that other teams might need in the future, right?
The skill is, I think, allowing the diversion and then bringing it back to something that then becomes repeatable, not dogmatically pushing forward on what you thought was the track. I always value those digressions. I think you can get some great stuff out of them. Yeah, exactly. Look, Cory, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I've got deep envy looking out the back of your patio doors there into sunshine, given the appalling summer we seem to be having in the UK at the moment. But it was wonderful. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Apologies for the network. It's always the network.
It happens. It happens. And it was all fine until you started dissing the AIs. That's all we're saying.
Just to be clear, I'm the databases and Kubernetes expert at Massdriver. I'm not the networking one, so apologies, networking people, for putting my iPhone 15 feet up in the air.
Like it seemed to go very well.
Yeah.
Anyway, so look, we end every episode of this podcast by asking our guests what they're excited about doing next, and that could be, something fun you're going to do at the weekend. We're recording on a Friday, or it could be something that's coming up in your professional life. So, Cory, what are you excited about doing next?
Mine's a combo. So, I'm a Florida boy who lives in Southern California now, and there's nothing I love more than just tanning my alligator skin, sitting in the hot tub. But I'm also a founder, right? And so like juggling these two lifestyles is very difficult. I want to lay in the hot tub. I need to send emails. And so My son's almost 5, and I'm a big believer in like I don't like the idea of like treating kids like kids. Like I like introducing like work and tools to him. Like he built his own little tower for standing in the kitchen. Like he didn't use the saws, but like he got to do the screws and drills and whatnot. So next big project is we're building a quarter round teak deck for the hot tub.
Nice. That
sits right at so it's an above ground. It's like one of those like Nordic wooden hot tubs that we have.
Oh,
so we're gonna build one. So Dad on Friday afternoons, because I got Friday afternoons off. We do half day Fridays, so Dad can have a little margarita in the hot tub with his laptop doing his emails. So I'm gonna do all my like weekly planning and my emails. Sorry VCs if you're hearing this. Yep, I'm gonna be doing it from the hot tub with a margarita and enjoy living in San Francisco, guys. So that's the next big project. I'm really excited. My son's like, do I get to use saws? And I'm like, no, you don't. But you can use the hammer and you can paint it or not paint.
That is like a microcosm of work-life balance right there, Cory. You've painted a picture.
I think you've invented a product right there. That's right. You need to industrialize that. That's the I need to listen. Yeah, it's just make sure that secure the laptop so it doesn't go plop into the water and all's good. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like. And is your Swedish hot tub, is it wood fired or is it electric?
So it's electric, but yeah, it's electric. It's amazing. It's electric, and then I don't know. I should read more about the technology and how it actually does the water, but it's a no chemical hot tub. So there's like when we bought the thing, there's the guy. It's funny. The guy that's selling it has no idea what it is either. It's just like a guy selling hot tubs, and he's like, "Yeah." It's my wife's like, "We can't have chemicals. Like I don't want like chlorine on the kid's skin." Just like crazy California thoughts. It's like, yeah, bleach is fine. Throw them in it. And so we're talking to the guy. He's like, oh yeah, so this thing's got like lasers and it just like shoots germs and kills them. And so like you never have to put chlorine in it. And I'm like, I don't think that's how it works, but like we're gonna buy it. So we have. I just tell everybody the thing has lasers in it and it shoots the germs and we don't have to put chlorine in it. It's great.
To get a light show late at night, so you sat there doing your emails, there's a great big laser show going on, and then a band pops up, and then the music starts, and off you go, yeah?
Yeah. Pretty much.
Brilliant, Cory. Well, look, enjoy that, man. I look forward to some pictures for that. That sounds like it's worth documenting.
Yeah. I think that if you go on my Twitter and you look back a few days to June 10th, you can see why this is important as you see a picture of my laptop on its side, cranking music, pushing water out of it. Don't balance your laptop on the side of the hot tub. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't work.
Necessity is the mother of invention, and there we have the answer right there. So good. Anyway, a huge thanks to our guest this week, Cory. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks also to our sound and editing wizard, Ben and Louie. Our should have had a different career producer, Marcel, and of course to all our listeners. We're on LinkedIn and X, Dave Chapman and Rob Kernan. Feel free to follow or connect with us, and please get in touch if you have any comments or ideas for the show. And of course, if you haven't already done that, rate and subscribe to the podcast. See you in another reality next week.